The beast, a dark and sleek shadow, began to draw near, its steps as silent as death itself. The grandmother, frail and disoriented, barely registered the imminent danger. But suddenly, a massive shape burst from the foliage. An imposing bull, with horns sharp as blades, had witnessed the scene. Its eyes, once calm, now burned with fury. With a powerful roar that echoed through the forest, the bull charged, not at the elderly woman, but at the panther. Its horns, an indomitable force of nature, struck the predator, chasing it away. The panther, surprised and intimidated by the unexpected rage, retreated into the shadows, leaving the grandmother safe under the bull's silent, protective guard. The silence that followed the panther's abrupt retreat was not one of peace, but of suspended tension, a chilling shiver that permeated the forest. The grandmother, still prostrate on the damp ground, felt her heart pound in her chest like a frantic drum. Her eyes, blurred by age and shock, fixed on the massive figure that now loomed over her. The bull, a colossus of muscle and contained fury, breathed heavily, its nostrils flared. Its horns still pointed at the spot where the beast had disappeared. There wasn't a sound from the panther, but the grandmother could feel its invisible presence. A pair of yellow eyes watching from the dark depths, waiting. The danger hadn't gone. It had merely hidden, like a patient shadow. Slowly, the grandmother tried to move, a weak groan escaping her cracked lips. Every fiber of her body ached, every bone protested. The fall, the fright, the penetrating cold of the night that was beginning to fall, everything added up to excruciating pain. The bull, sensing her movement, lowered its head slightly, a guttural sound vibrating in its chest. It wasn't a threat, but a warning, a sound that seemed to say, "Stay still, danger still lurks." The grandmother, despite her initial fear of the imposing creature, felt a strange wave of gratitude. This animal, wild and powerful, had been her unexpected guardian, her savior against certain death. Where was her grandson, the blood of her blood, the boy she had raised with so much love? The image of Lucas's false smile, the way he had pushed her into the forest abyss, returned with brutal clarity. The betrayal was a wound deeper than any panther's scratch. Tears, long since dry, welled up again, hot and bitter, streaming down the wrinkles of her face, abandoned, left to die, by Lucas. The pain of the revelation was almost unbearable. She had been a burden, an inconvenience to his luxurious, carefree life. The thought was a poison spreading through her veins, colder than the night's dew. The bull, as if sensing the old woman's anguish, took a slow, careful step. Its dark eyes, once full of fury, now seemed to carry a strange compassion. It leaned down, and with its wet, warm muzzle, gently nudged the grandmother's shoulder. It wasn't aggression, but an invitation, an encouragement. "Get up," it seemed to say. "We cannot stay here." With a monumental effort, the grandmother managed to prop herself up on one elbow, then the other. Her muscles trembled and her head spun. The bull waited patiently, its presence an anchor amidst the chaos. It watched the surrounding forest, its large, sensitive ears swiveling, catching the faintest sounds. A distant rustle of leaves, the snap of a broken branch. Each sound was a reminder of the lurking panther. With the help of a protruding root and the bull's silent support, the grandmother managed to sit up, her back against the trunk of an ancient tree. The cold of the earth crept up her legs, but the bull's proximity emanated a comforting warmth, a barrier against despair. She looked at the animal, its rough, dark hide, its powerful muscles. It was a creature of nature, wild and unpredictable. But at that moment, it was her only hope, her only friend. The panther, however, had not given up. A low, guttural growl echoed from somewhere in the darkness, closer than before. It was a sound that promised revenge, that announced the hunter's persistence. The bull reacted instantly, its muscles tensing, its horns pointing in the direction of the sound. It positioned itself between the grandmother and the invisible threat, a living, breathing shield. The grandmother's heart accelerated again. The momentary relief dissolved, replaced by a renewed wave of panic. She was trapped, old and weak, in the middle of a hostile forest, with a relentless predator awaiting its chance. And her grandson, he would now be in his mansion, enjoying his fortune, laughing at her cruelty. The image was so vivid, it made her clench her fists, a spark of anger mixed with her exhaustion. The bull, without taking its eyes off the darkness, gave a small nudge with its muzzle against the grandmother's leg, a gesture that seemed to urge, "We need to go." But where? The grandmother had no idea. She was lost, aimless, without strength. Night was advancing, and with it, the cold intensified, promising a slow death if the panther didn't find her first. The bull, however, seemed to have a plan, a wild intuition. It began to move slowly, looking back to ensure the grandmother followed. It was an uncertain journey to an unknown destination, but with the bull by her side, the grandmother felt a spark of courage reignite in her chest. The fight for survival was just beginning. Night swallowed the forest, transforming every shadow into a potential predator, every rustle of leaves into a shiver down her spine. The grandmother, with superhuman effort, managed to stand, leaning on the rough tree trunk. Her knees trembled like thin reeds in the wind, and the pain in her back was a dull knife twisting with every movement. The bull, her unlikely guardian, waited, its dark eyes fixed on the surrounding darkness. It took a slow step, then another, a silent invitation for her to follow. There was no choice. To stay there was certain death, whether from the relentless cold of the night, hunger, or the panther that still prowled. With a muffled groan, the grandmother took her first trembling step. Her hand outstretched to touch the bull's rough hide, seeking support, a connection with that brute force that offered itself as her salvation. The animal did not recoil. On the contrary, it slowed its pace, adapting its powerful stride to her fragility. It was as if it understood the urgency and limitations of its companion. With each step, a new challenge. Dry branches cracked under their feet, revealing their presence. The twisted roots of the forest were invisible traps in the gloom, and the uneven terrain threatened to trip her at any moment. The cold, once just a shiver, now seeped into her bones, making her movements even slower and more painful. Her breath came out in clouds of vapor, and with each exhale, the grandmother felt a little more of her life drain away. But the panther would not let them forget its presence. A low growl, almost a hiss, echoed again, this time closer, coming from the right. The bull reacted instantly. Its muscles tensed, and it spun, positioning itself again between the grandmother and the invisible threat. Its horns, once pointed forward, now swept the darkness, a barrier of steel and fury. The grandmother smelled the animal's strong, wild scent, a mixture of earth, sweat, and a primal instinct of protection. The image of Lucas, smiling as he pushed her into this hell, burned in her mind. How could he? How could her daughter's son, the grandson she had raised with so much care and sacrifice, be so cruel? The betrayal was a poison that weakened her more than the cold or physical pain. But at the same time, the bull's presence, its silent and unwavering loyalty, ignited a small flame of resilience. If a wild animal could show such compassion, she could not simply give up. The bull, after a moment of tension, gave a gentle nudge with its muzzle against her waist, a reminder to keep going. It seemed to have a destination in mind, moving with a determination that transcended mere flight. It did not run, but advanced cautiously, its eyes and ears constantly alert to dangers. The grandmother, with no other option, blindly trusted this unexpected guide. They delved deeper into the forest, the vegetation growing denser, the tree trunks thicker and older. Moonlight, when it managed to penetrate the canopy, created ghostly patterns on the ground. The grandmother stumbled, almost falling, but the bull's head was there, a firm support against her shoulder, helping her regain balance. It was her cane, her shield, her beacon in the darkness. Suddenly, a quick movement at the periphery of her vision. A dark shape, swift as lightning, crossed a clearing ahead. The panther. It was circling them, playing with its prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. The grandmother's heart leaped to her throat. She could feel the beast's yellow eyes, even without seeing them, burning in the darkness. The bull let out a loud snort, a warning, and quickened its pace, pushing the grandmother more firmly. It now led her through a tangle of thorny bushes, which scratched her clothes and skin, but offered dense cover. The panther, though agile, would have more difficulty moving silently there. The grandmother felt her body failing, her mind clouded by exhaustion and fear. But each time she thought of giving up, the image of Lucas, his scornful smile, the betrayal, spurred her on. She would not die there, not to give him the satisfaction of getting rid of her. She would fight, even if her body was just an empty shell. The bull, with surprising strength, forced its way through a barrier of vines and dense foliage. They emerged into a small clearing, where an enormous rock rose, forming a kind of recess, a natural shelter. It wasn't a deep cave, but it offered protection from the wind and perhaps from the panther for a while. The bull stopped, positioning itself at the entrance of the recess. Its horns pointed outwards, like sentinels. It snorted again, a deep, menacing sound, warning the approaching beast. The grandmother, exhausted, collapsed onto the cold rock floor, feeling the momentary relief of being out of the panther's immediate sight. But the danger had not disappeared. The panther's growl echoed again, this time very close. From outside the rock, it was there, waiting. That recess was just a breather, a postponement. The fight for survival was far from over, and the night was still long and full of terrors. The bull, her faithful guardian, was the only thing between her and death, and the grandmother knew that sooner or later the panther would make its final move. The tension was palpable, an invisible, taut thread holding her life by a hair. The cold, damp rock seemed to suck the last remnants of warmth from the grandmother's body. Her muscles, already exhausted, now trembled uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from the terror that paralyzed her. Outside, the panther. She could feel the beast's presence, almost hear its heavy breathing in the darkness that enveloped the shelter. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig was a warning, a reminder of the lurking death. The bull, however, was a living wall. It stood firm at the entrance of the recess, its horns pointed into the void, an imposing silhouette against the gloom. Its eyes, once furious, now glowed with unyielding vigilance, sweeping the darkness in search of any movement. A low growl, almost a menacing purr, vibrated in its chest, a clear warning to the predator. The grandmother tried to shrink further against the rock, seeking a warmth that wasn't there. The pain in her back and legs was constant, a faithful companion in her misery. But strangely, the image of Lucas, the cruelty in his eyes, the anger she felt at his betrayal, was a fire that prevented her from completely succumbing. She would not give him the satisfaction of dying there, like an abandoned animal, not after everything she had done for him. Time seemed to drag on, each second an eternity. The panther's growl echoed again, this time sharper, more impatient. The beast was testing the bull's limits, assessing its resistance. The grandmother could imagine the panther moving stealthily around the rock, its muscles tense, its yellow eyes fixed on the bull, looking for an opening, a moment of distraction. Suddenly, a scratching sound on the upper part of the rock. The panther was trying to climb. The grandmother's heart pounded, beating erratically against her ribs. The bull reacted with a powerful snort, a sound that made the earth tremble. It took a step back, then another, turning to face the threat coming from above. Its horns rose, ready for battle. The grandmother, with a muffled cry, tried to move, but her body wouldn't respond. She was trapped, a terrified spectator of her own imminent death. She saw the panther's shadow briefly project into the entrance of the recess, a dark, lethal shape, before the bull charged with renewed fury. The clash was brutal. The sound of the impact echoed through the forest, a mix of growls, snorts, and the scratching of claws against the rock. The grandmother closed her eyes, expecting the worst, the smell of blood already lingering in her imagination. But the bull was a force of nature. It charged with surprising ferocity, its horns striking the panther with force, making it recoil with a yelp of pain and frustration. The beast, though wounded, did not give up. It was an experienced, patient, and relentless hunter. It moved away for a moment, only to reappear at another point, trying to flank the bull, seeking an opening to the grandmother. The bull, however, was equally determined. It spun, its eyes always fixed on the panther, its muscles tense, ready to defend its charge. The grandmother opened her eyes, watching the deadly dance. She saw the gleam of the panther's teeth, the sharp claws, the slender, powerful body. And she saw the bull, its rough, dark hide, its imposing horns, its unwavering determination. It was a battle of titans, and she was the prize. The night's cold continued to bite, but the adrenaline kept the grandmother strangely alert. She thought of the years she had dedicated to Lucas, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the renunciations, and all to be thrown away like trash, a nuisance. The anger was a heat that consumed her, an energy that kept her from fainting. The bull, with a quick and precise movement, managed to corner the panther against a tree. The beast hissed, its back arched, ready for a counterattack, but the bull gave it no chance. It lowered its head and charged with all its might, pushing the panther with its horns. The beast let out a roar of pain, and the grandmother could hear the sound of something breaking. The panther, wounded and humiliated, staggered away, disappearing into the shadows of the forest. The bull remained motionless for a moment, its eyes still sweeping the darkness, making sure the threat had truly left. It snorted, a sound of triumph and exhaustion. The grandmother let out a trembling sigh of relief. The immediate danger had passed, but the night was still long. The bull, limping slightly on one of its front legs, returned to the entrance of the recess. It lay down, its muscles still tense, but with an air of weariness. Its eyes, however, remained open, vigilant. The grandmother felt a wave of gratitude so intense that tears, once of anger and fear, now streamed down her face, warm and sincere. She reached out a trembling hand and touched the bull's rough muzzle. It didn't move, just tilted its head slightly, as if accepting the gesture. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "My angel, my savior." The bull closed its eyes for an instant, then opened them again, fixing them on the darkness. The panther had retreated, but the forest was still full of dangers, and the grandmother knew they couldn't stay there forever. The cold continued to intensify, and with each passing minute, her strength diminished. The battle for survival had been won, but the war was far from over. They needed to find a path, a refuge, before morning came and brought new challenges, or before the panther, recovered, returned to finish what it started. The tension remained in the air, dense and cold like the mist beginning to rise from the forest floor. The mist, dense and cold, began to creep across the forest floor, enveloping the rocky recess in a frigid embrace. The grandmother, still trembling from exhaustion and relief, felt the damp cold penetrate her bones, stealing the little warmth the adrenaline of battle had generated. The bull, her wounded guardian, lay at the entrance, its eyes open and vigilant, but the slight limp in its front leg was a cruel reminder that victory had come at a cost. The panther had retreated, yes, but the forest, with its night sounds and dancing shadows, seemed to conspire to keep fear alive. Every distant snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sent a shiver down the grandmother's spine. The beast was wounded, yes, but wounded beasts are the most dangerous. She knew the panther wouldn't give up easily. That growl of pain and frustration echoed in her mind, a promise of return. The bull, sensing her anguish, let out a soft snort, almost a reassuring murmur, and nudged its muzzle against her shoulder. It was a gesture of comfort, but also a silent reminder that vigilance could not cease. Hours dragged on, heavy and endless. The grandmother tried to find a less painful position on the cold rock floor, but every movement was torture for her aching muscles. Hunger and thirst began to gnaw, adding another layer of suffering to her ordeal. She thought of Lucas, of the warm house, the food on the table, the soft bed he had denied her. Anger simmered, an antidote to the despair that threatened to engulf her. She would not die there, not to give him the satisfaction of her absence. The bull suddenly raised its head, its ears twitching, catching sounds the grandmother couldn't distinguish. A new kind of tension filled the air. It wasn't the panther's growl, but something different, more subtle, perhaps more insidious. It stood up, with difficulty, its injured leg making it stumble for an instant, but its determination was unshakable. It looked at the grandmother, its dark eyes conveying a silent urgency. They couldn't stay there any longer. With a gentle nudge of its muzzle, the bull indicated the direction opposite to where the panther had fled. The grandmother, reluctant but blindly trusting her guide, gathered her last strength and stood up. Every step was agony, but the idea of remaining in that shelter, waiting for the beast's return, was even more terrifying. They moved out of the recess, the thick mist enveloping them like a shroud. Visibility was almost nil, and the cold seemed to drain the very life from their bodies. The bull, despite its injury, forged a path with impressive caution, sniffing the air, its eyes piercing the gloom. It seemed to have an innate sense of direction, an internal compass that guided it through the dense forest. The grandmother, clinging to its flanks, stumbled constantly, the roots and stones hidden by the mist making the terrain treacherous. Her feet were numb, her hands scratched, but she refused to give up. Lucas would not win. Suddenly the bull stopped, its muscles tense, a distant sound, faint but unmistakable, running water. Hope, long dormant, ignited a small flame in the grandmother's chest. Water meant life, and perhaps, just perhaps, a way out of that nightmare. The bull snorted, a sound of recognition, and quickened its pace, limping but determined. They advanced a few more meters, and the sound of water grew clearer, transforming into a soft murmur. The mist began to dissipate slightly, revealing the silhouette of a small waterfall, its waters cascading into a narrow, rocky stream. The grandmother felt such a wave of relief that her legs threatened to give way. She could drink, wash her wounds, perhaps even find some kind of food. But the forest never gave up its secrets without a price. As they approached the stream bank, the bull let out a low, menacing growl. Its eyes were fixed on something ahead, something the mist still hid from the grandmother's view. The smell. She smelled it before she saw it, a pungent, unmistakable odor of smoke. And then, the silhouette. It wasn't the panther, but something equally disturbing. On the edge of the stream, an improvised camp. A dying campfire emitted a wisp of smoke, and around it, sleeping human figures. They didn't seem like ordinary hunters or loggers. Their clothes were ragged, their postures too relaxed for people just resting. And there was something else, a metallic glint that the grandmother noticed even in the gloom. Weapons. The grandmother's heart pounded again, to escape the panther only to fall into the hands of whom? Bandits? Illegal hunters. The forest had revealed itself to be a purgatory of dangers, and now the threat was human. The bull, sensing the new danger, slowly retreated, pushing the grandmother back into the safety of the shadows. It snorted, a sound of alarm, but also of frustration. Its injured leg prevented it from being as agile as before. They were caught between a rock and a hard place, or rather, between the panther and armed men. The grandmother felt despair tighten its grip. The water, the promise of salvation, was now a lure to a new kind of danger. She looked at the bull, her faithful protector, and saw the exhaustion in its eyes, the pain in its limp. It had done so much for her, but how much further could it go? One of the men in the camp stirred, letting out a grunt. The grandmother and the bull froze, hidden by the mist and the trees. The man sat up, scratching his head, and looked directly in their direction, though his sleepy eyes didn't seem to focus on anything specific. He stood up, swaying slightly, and headed to the stream to drink water. The bull, with surprising intelligence, crouched down, signaling for the grandmother to do the same. They crept behind a dense bush, observing the man. He was large, with a scraggly beard and a harsh look. He washed his face, then took a metal bottle and took a long swig. The smell of alcohol reached the grandmother, even from a distance. They were bandits, no doubt. The grandmother felt an even greater chill. The panther was a physical threat, but these men represented a different darkness, a human cruelty she knew well, coming from her own grandson. She clung to the bull, her only link to life. The night was still long, and the path to safety seemed to stretch infinitely, paved with new and terrifying challenges. The water was there, so close, but unattainable. They were cornered once again, and the sun was still hours away. The mist, a damp and icy shroud, embraced the forest, transforming each tree into a ghostly shadow. The grandmother, huddled behind the dense bush, felt her heart pound in her chest, a drum of fear and exhaustion. A few meters away, the man stumbled back to the dying campfire, his smell of alcohol mixing with the acrid odor of smoke and the dampness of the forest. They were bandits. The certainty was a cold blow, sharper than the wind that gently howled through the trees. She looked at the bull, her guardian angel. It was crouched, its muscles tense, its eyes fixed on the sleeping men. Its injured leg throbbed, visibly swollen, but its vigilance was unshakable. It had faced a panther, but the human threat brought a different complexity, a cruelty not guided by instinct, but by calculated malevolence. The grandmother felt an even deeper chill. Lucas, her grandson, had shown that same cruelty, that same coldness when abandoning her. The forest, after all, was just a mirror of the darkness that dwelt in the hearts of men. Thirst was a constant torture, her throat dry and scratchy. The stream water, so close, murmured a tempting promise but unattainable. With each passing minute, her strength waned, and the prospect of spending the rest of the night there, trapped between bandits and the darkness that could bring the panther back, was unbearable. She needed to move. She needed water. She needed a plan. But what plan? The bull, as if reading her thoughts, snorted softly, a sound of contained frustration. It leaned in, gently nudging her with its muzzle, indicating they should retreat further into the shadows, circling the camp. It was a risky move. The mist, while offering cover, also hid roots, stones, and the danger of getting even more deeply lost in the unknown forest. But staying there was a death sentence. With a trembling sigh, the grandmother nodded. Every movement was a battle against pain and weakness. She clung to the bull's flank, feeling the warmth of its body, the strength beneath its rough hide. It moved with calculated slowness, its injured leg causing it to limp, but its eyes never stopped scanning the surroundings. They crept, step by step, moving away from the stream and the camp, the mist swallowing their footsteps. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant rustle of leaves and the muffled sound of the waterfall. The grandmother felt the smell of smoke receding, replaced by the damp aroma of earth and decaying leaves. But with each meter they moved away, the feeling of being lost grew stronger. The forest seemed to close in on them, the trees becoming impenetrable walls. Suddenly, the bull stopped, tense. Its ears twitched, catching a sound the grandmother couldn't identify. It wasn't the panther's growl, nor the voice of one of the men. It was a more subtle sound, a dragging, an uneven rustle. It pushed the grandmother behind a fallen log, and she obeyed without question, her heart pounding erratically. Through the mist, a silhouette materialized. It wasn't the panther, but a smaller animal, crawling along the forest floor. A wild boar, perhaps, or a wild dog. But the bull didn't relax. Its eyes were fixed on the creature, and a low, almost inaudible growl escaped its throat. The grandmother strained her eyes, trying to decipher the shape. It was a coyote, thin and hungry, sniffing the ground. It seemed injured, limping on one of its front paws, and its eyes gleamed with desperate hunger. The coyote didn't notice them, focused on its search for food. But its presence was a reminder that the forest was alive, and every creature fought for its survival. The bull, however, seemed more concerned with something beyond the coyote. It continued to sniff the air, its nostrils flared, and the grandmother smelled a different scent. A faint but familiar trail, the smell of the panther. The beast hadn't gone far. It was nearby, perhaps recovering from its injuries, perhaps just waiting for the right moment to strike again. The tension was almost unbearable. They were caught between the bandits, the hungry coyote, and the wounded panther. The grandmother felt tears well up again, not from anger, but from a deep despair. How could they escape so many dangers? The bull, sensing the panther's scent intensify slightly, decided they couldn't stay there. It stood up, ignoring the pain in its leg, and pushed the grandmother forward in a new direction, even deeper into the dense forest. They needed shelter, a place where they could hide until dawn. The mist began to thicken again, and visibility dropped to almost zero. The grandmother stumbled with every step, her legs heavy as lead. The cold was excruciating, and she felt numbness spreading through her limbs. Hunger and thirst were a constant ache, a cruel reminder of her vulnerability. Suddenly, the bull stopped. It raised its head, its ears swiveling. A sound, a different sound. It wasn't an animal nor the wind. It was a metallic sound, a muffled creak, followed by a thud. It seemed to come from above, or from something large and heavy moving. The bull let out an alert snort, and its eyes widened. The grandmother looked up into the impenetrable darkness of the mist. Her eyes couldn't see anything, but the feeling of something immense and threatening hung over them. The bull, with a quick and desperate movement, pushed her aside, to the protection of a cluster of thorny bushes. A second later, an enormous, rotten, heavy branch crashed down from the top of a tree, falling with a deafening thud exactly where they had been an instant before. The impact made the earth tremble. The grandmother let out a muffled cry, her heart pounding. The branch, the size of a small trunk, had broken and shattered on the ground, raising a cloud of dirt and leaves. By a whisker, they had escaped being crushed, but what had caused the fall? A strong wind, or something more sinister, moving in the treetops. The crash of the falling branch echoed through the forest, a dry thunder that tore through the mist's silence. The grandmother, still clinging to the bull, felt the impact through the earth, a vibration that ran through her bones. The smell of damp earth and rotten wood filled her nostrils, mixed with the dread that chilled her blood. By a hair's breadth, death had brushed past them, an invisible hand of the forest trying to crush them. She let out a muffled groan, her heart still pounding, and looked at the bull. It was panting, its eyes wide, fixed on the darkness above, as if trying to decipher the intention behind that unexpected attack. Was it the wind, or something more sinister, a gigantic creature moving in the treetops, detaching death from above? The forest, she realized, with an even greater chill, was not just a home for predators and cruel men. It was a living, unpredictable entity, capable of launching challenges in all forms. The noise, however, did not go unnoticed. From the bandits' camp, one of the men stirred again, muttering something unintelligible. The grandmother and the bull froze, watching. The man sat up, rubbing his eyes, and looked in the direction from which the sound had come. His vision, blurred by sleep and alcohol, did not seem to focus on anything specific. He yawned, swore, and lay down again, turning to his other side. A momentary relief, but the grandmother knew that the human threat was still there, latent, waiting for dawn. But the panther. The panther was different. The crash of the branch, the smell of disturbed earth, the panic in the air, all of it was an invitation to the beast. The bull raised its head, its nostrils flared. The panther's scent, once faint and distant, was now undeniable, more intense, closer. A low, guttural growl escaped the bull's throat, a warning, a challenge. The grandmother felt the hairs on her arm bristle. The beast was coming. It had been drawn by the noise, by the promise of wounded prey, or perhaps just by the curiosity of its violated territory. There was no time to lose. To stay there, even behind the thorny bushes, was a death sentence. The bull, ignoring the searing pain in its injured leg, nudged the grandmother with its muzzle, indicating they should move. Not backward, not sideways, but forward, even deeper into the impenetrable darkness of the forest. It seemed to have a destination in mind, a place that it, with its animal intelligence, had perceived as a potential refuge. Every step was torture for the grandmother. Her legs, heavy as lead, barely supported her. The cold was excruciating, penetrating her thin clothes and stealing the warmth from her body. Numbness spread through her limbs, and hunger and thirst were a constant ache. A cruel reminder of her vulnerability, she clung to the bull's flank, feeling the warmth of its body as her only refuge, her only anchor in the storm of dangers that surrounded them. It limped, but its determination was unshakable, its eyes scanning the mist, seeking a path, a hope. The mist, a damp and icy shroud, thickened with every meter, transforming the trees into ghostly shadows and visibility into almost zero. The grandmother stumbled over hidden roots and stones, and the bull guided her patiently, gently pushing her when she hesitated. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant rustle of leaves and the muffled sound of the waterfall, which now seemed a distant lament. The smell of the bandit's smoke disappeared, replaced by the damp aroma of earth and decaying leaves, and by the increasingly strong smell of the panther. But the bull wasn't just worried about the coyote. It continued to sniff the air, its nostrils flared, and the grandmother felt the panther's scent intensify drastically. The beast was nearby, very close. A shiver ran down her spine. She could almost feel the predator's warm breath on her neck. The bull let out an alert snort, and its eyes widened. They were cornered. Between the bandits, the hungry coyote, and the wounded, furious panther, the grandmother felt tears well up again, not from anger, but from a deep and overwhelming despair. How could they escape so many dangers? The bull, sensing the panther's scent intensify slightly, decided they couldn't stay there. It stood up, ignoring the pain in its leg, and pushed the grandmother forward in a new direction, even deeper into the dense forest. They needed shelter, a place where they could hide until dawn. The bull, however, did not stop. The falling branch had been a warning, a brutal reminder that there was no safety anywhere. It pushed the grandmother again, this time with more urgency, towards a narrow crevice between two gigantic rocks, almost hidden by dense foliage. The grandmother hesitated. The crevice seemed dark, tight, almost a trap. But the bull's gaze was unwavering, and she felt that it had found something, an intuition that transcended human logic. With a trembling sigh, she squeezed through the opening, feeling the cold rock scratch her clothes. The bull, with its injured leg, had more difficulty. It snorted, forcing its massive body through the narrow passage, its muscles contracting under its hide. Finally, It succeeded, and they found themselves in a small natural chamber, a kind of shallow cave, protected from the wind and mist. It wasn't a perfect shelter, but it was better than the open air. The panther's scent, however, seemed to have followed them. Inside the crevice, the air was stuffy, and the predator's acrid odor was stronger, more oppressive. The grandmother felt a chill. The beast was nearby, perhaps even lurking outside the crevice, waiting patiently. The bull lay down, exhausted, but its eyes never left the cave's opening, fixed on the darkness outside. The grandmother huddled against it, feeling the warmth of its body, the only thing keeping her warm. The distant sound of the bandits, the coyote's howl, and the panther's scent. The night was an endless nightmare, and with each passing minute the hope of survival seemed more distant, more fragile. They were trapped, and the darkness of the forest seemed to close in on them, ready to swallow them whole. The small natural chamber, once a refuge, now seemed like a tomb. The air, already stuffy, grew heavy with the panther's scent. A pungent, wild odor that penetrated the grandmother's nostrils, mixing with the cold sweat of her own fear. It was no longer a distant smell, a warning. It was the beast's presence, so palpable she could almost feel the warmth of its breath, the brush of its invisible whiskers in the darkness outside. The bull, exhausted, lay beside her, its massive body a shield. But its eyes remained fixed on the narrow crevice that separated them from the forest's abyss. Its ears swiveled, catching every rustle of a leaf, every snap of a twig. It snorted softly, a guttural sound that was both a warning and a lament. The grandmother, huddled against it, felt every beat of its powerful heart, every tremor in its tense muscles. It was the only thing that kept her anchored. The only proof she wasn't alone in that nightmare. Outside, the mist danced, transforming the trees into twisted phantoms. And then, a sound, a subtle drag, almost inaudible, followed by a low, deep growl that reverberated through the cave rocks. The panther. It was there, lurking, testing. The grandmother closed her eyes, wishing it was all a dream, a feverish hallucination. But the biting cold, the searing pain in her legs, the hunger gnawing at her stomach, everything was too real. The bull stirred, a hoarse groan escaping its throat. Its injured leg hurt, but it rose slightly, positioning its body to block the crevice entrance. Its horns, once weapons against the cruel grandson, were now its only defense against imminent death. The grandmother opened her eyes and saw the fierce determination in its gaze, a glint of defiance that made her feel a pang of hope, however faint. A dark shape moved in the crevice. It wasn't the entire panther, but a shadow, an outline. The beast was approaching, perhaps trying to peer in, assessing the situation. The bull let out a roar, a primal warning that made the air vibrate. The shadow recoiled for an instant, but the panther's scent remained, even more intense, as if the beast itself was pressed against the rock outside. The grandmother felt her throat dry. With each passing minute, the night seemed to stretch, the darkness denser, the cold more penetrating. She thought of her grandson, of the betrayal, of the cruelty. Anger, a dying fire, tried to reignite. But despair was an overwhelming wave, engulfing everything. How could they resist? They were just a frail old woman and a wounded bull against the cunning and ferocity of a panther, not to mention the bandits and the coyote still prowling. Suddenly, a sharp scratch. The panther was trying to force its way in, its claws scraping against the rock. The sound was deafening in the small chamber. The bull snorted, its muscles tense, ready for a fight. It pushed its head against the crevice, its horns pointed outwards, a wall of flesh and bone. The grandmother could hear the panther's heavy breathing on the other side, the sound of its body rubbing against the stone. The beast was furious, impatient, but the crevice was too narrow for the panther to enter completely. It could get its head in, perhaps a paw, but not its entire body. It was an advantage, but a fragile one. The panther growled again, a sound that seemed to tear the very fabric of the night. It was frustrated, and the frustration of a hungry predator was as dangerous as its hunt. The bull recoiled a step, panting, and the grandmother realized it wasn't just defending the entrance. It was sniffing the air again, its nostrils flared. There was another scent, more subtle, mixed with the panther's, a smell of smoke and human sweat. The bandits. They were moving, perhaps awakened by the panther's noise or the previous branch fall. A chill ran down the grandmother's spine, trapped between the panther and the men. There was no escape. The cave, their refuge, had become a perfect trap. The bull, sensing her panic, gently nudged her with its muzzle, a gesture of comfort and encouragement. It was still fighting, still had hope. The panther's growl intensified, but this time it seemed to come from a little further away, as if the beast was moving away from the crevice, but still nearby. The bull let out a snort of relief, but its eyes were still alert. It knew the panther wouldn't give up easily. It was just changing tactics. And then a different sound, not the panther's growl, nor the coyote's howl. It was the sound of heavy footsteps, of muffled voices coming from the direction they had fled. The bandits were approaching. The grandmother felt her heart sink. The panther, the bandits, the coyote. The entire forest seemed to conspire against them. The bull, with a surprising movement for its size and injury, pushed the grandmother to the back of the small cave. It turned, positioning itself facing the entrance, its horns lowered, ready to face whatever came. Its eyes, once full of weariness, now shone with a protective fury. The grandmother, on the cold cave floor, felt tears stream down again. There was no more anger, just a deep weariness, a resignation. But looking at the bull, at its unwavering courage, a small flame of resistance ignited within her. It would not give up, and if it would not give up, neither could she. The bandits' footsteps grew louder, accompanied by low laughter and the clinking of metal. They were close, very close. The grandmother could hear the voices, indistinct but menacing. The panther, in turn, seemed to have disappeared again, its scent still present, but its physical presence more subtle, as if it were waiting for the right moment to attack. The mist, outside, began to dissipate slightly, revealing the first grey outlines of dawn. A weak, ghostly light filtered through the trees, but it brought no hope, only a new layer of terror. The light would reveal them, expose them. The night, with its protective darkness, was coming to an end, and with it, perhaps, their last chance to survive. The bull's snort was not just a warning, it was a premonition. The grandmother, her heart pounding in her chest, followed the animal's gaze to the ceiling of the small chamber. The darkness was still dense there, but the sound was unmistakable, a dry rustle followed by a subtle scrape, like sharp claws searching for a crevice, a weak point. It wasn't the weight of a body, but the cunning of a predatory mind in action. The panther. It hadn't given up on the main entrance, but was exploring other avenues, using the very rock structure against them. A small pebble broke loose from above, ricocheting off the wall and falling near their feet. The sound, amplified by the cave's confinement, seemed like a gunshot. The grandmother cringed further, panic taking over. The beast was above them, not just lurking outside. The cave, which had seemed a sanctuary, was now a trap, with the ceiling about to collapse. The bull snorted again, a sound of contained fury. It moved with difficulty, its injured leg protesting, but its determination was unshakable. With a surprising movement, it pushed the grandmother to the deepest part of the cave, where the ceiling seemed most solid, and positioned itself, no longer just to block the crevice, but to face the danger coming from above. Its horns, once pointed at the entrance, now rose, almost touching the uneven ceiling, as if it could, with its brute strength, hold back the very mountain. Outside, the mist began to yield to the first pale rays of dawn. A ghostly light seeped through the crevice, revealing the twisted silhouettes of the trees and the vapor rising from the damp ground. But the light brought no relief. It only made visible the dust that now fell from the cave ceiling, an unequivocal sign that the panther was at work. The predator's acrid scent, mixed with the smell of damp earth and crushed stones, filled the air. Then, a low, guttural growl echoed from above, coming from some invisible point in the rocks. It wasn't an attack growl, but one of effort, of frustration. The panther was trying to dislodge a larger stone, perhaps to create an opening, perhaps to bring down the entrance and crush them. The grandmother could hear the scratching of its claws, the sound of its body twisting against the rock. It was a silent and desperate battle between the brute force of nature and the cunning of a predator. The bandit's footsteps, once distant, were now undeniably close. The voices, once muffled, became clearer, though still unintelligible. They were approaching the cave area, drawn perhaps by the panther's noise or by a hunter's instinct. The clinking of metal, the rustle of leaves under heavy boots, each sound was a nail in the coffin of the grandmother's hope. Trapped between the predator from above and the men from outside, there was nowhere to run. The bull, its eyes fixed on the ceiling, let out a low moan. Its injured leg was bleeding again, and the effort of staying alert, of protecting, was taking its toll. But it did not falter. It was a guardian, a wall of flesh and bone against the darkness that surrounded them. The grandmother, watching it, felt a wave of gratitude and despair. It was her only chance. But how much more could it endure? Suddenly, a loud crack. A fist-sized stone broke loose from the ceiling, falling forcefully and hitting the cave floor, raising a cloud of dust. The grandmother coughed, the smell of broken rock and dust suffocating her. The bull recoiled slightly, but maintained its position, its eyes glowing with unwavering fury. The panther was succeeding. It was dismantling their shelter, stone by stone. The panther's growl intensified, now with a tone of triumph, as if it knew it was winning. The sound came from a higher point, and the grandmother felt a chill. What if the panther managed to squeeze through an opening in the ceiling? It would be the end. But then, a new sound mingled with the growl and the falling stones. A sound of human voices, much closer now, and one of them seemed to be shouting, "Hey, what's that over there?" The voice was harsh, full of curiosity and threat. The bandits had seen something, perhaps the panther itself, or perhaps the cave entrance, now more visible in the dawn light. The panther, hearing the voices, stopped its attack on the ceiling. The growl ceased. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the noise. The cunning beast had perceived the new threat. It didn't want competitors for its prey. Its scent was still strong, but its physical presence seemed to have shifted again, perhaps to observe the newcomers. The bull, however, did not relax. It knew the panther was patient. It turned its head slightly, its ears swiveling to catch the sounds of the bandits. They were standing outside the crevice, discussing in low voices. The grandmother could distinguish some words now. Something big. Fresh tracks. And that smell. They were sniffing, investigating. The dawn light, which had once seemed a promise of revelation, was now a sentence. It illuminated the cave entrance, making them visible. The bull, sensing the imminent danger, pushed the grandmother again, this time with more force, to the darkest and deepest corner of the chamber. It positioned itself at the entrance, its massive body filling as much space as possible, its horns lowered, pointed outwards. It was ready for the final battle. The bandits' voices grew even louder. One of them laughed, a cruel, humorless sound. "Well, well, what do we have here? Looks like the forest brought us a present." The sound of heavy footsteps approached the crevice. The grandmother closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the bull's body against her, the only shield between her and death. The panther, the bandits, the coyote still prowling somewhere. The entire forest seemed to have risen to devour them. Dawn had arrived, and with it the certainty that the fight for survival was just beginning, and this time there was nowhere left to run. They were cornered, and time had run out. Time, which had once seemed to stretch into an eternity of terror, now contracted, relentless. There was nowhere left to run. Dawn, with its pale, treacherous light, had arrived, and with it the revelation of the siege. The bandits' voices, once distant and muffled, now sounded with brutal clarity, each word a blow to the grandmother's chest. "Well, well, what do we have here? Looks like the forest brought us a present." The voice was harsh, laden with cruel amusement that made the grandmother's skin crawl. A dry, guttural laugh echoed, followed by the clinking of metal, perhaps a buckle, perhaps a weapon. Heavy footsteps drew even closer, and the grandmother, squeezed into the darkest corner of the cave, felt the air thin. The bull, a giant of flesh and bone, was her only shield. It filled the crevice entrance, its massive body an impassable barrier, its horns lowered, pointed at the approaching threat. Its eyes, once weary, burned with an ancestral fury, a silent promise that no one would pass it without a fight. The grandmother could feel the warmth of its body, the smell of sweat and earth, a strange mix of comfort and panic. Outside, the mist dissolved into sparse veils, revealing the silhouettes of 3 men. They were rough figures, with dirty clothes and faces marked by wildlife or malice. One of them, who seemed to be the leader, was a corpulent man with a tangled beard and a crumpled hat. He carried a long-barreled rifle, which he now pointed at the cave entrance. The other 2, younger and thinner, had machetes strapped to their waists. "What's this? An ox? And is there someone inside?" The leader spoke, his voice closer now, almost at the entrance. He took a step forward, trying to peer over the bull. "Hey, old man! What are you doing there, protecting a hole?" The bull snorted, a deep, menacing sound that made the cave floor vibrate. It did not retreat an inch. Its eyes, fixed on the bandits, were a clear warning. The grandmother on the cold ground felt a wave of admiration and despair. It was injured, exhausted, but its determination was unshakable. "It's a brave bull, boss," said one of the younger bandits with a cautious tone. "And it looks like it's not alone. Smells like an old person in there." "Old, huh?" The leader laughed again, a sound that made the grandmother flinch. "Even better. Maybe there's something valuable. Get out of the way, beast. We don't want to hurt you. Yet." He tried to push the bull with the rifle barrel, but the animal didn't move. Instead, it lowered its head even further, scraping a horn on the rocky ground, a gesture of pure defiance. The leader, surprised by the resistance, took a step back. It was then that a different sound cut through the air. It wasn't from the bandits nor the bull. It was a low growl coming from above, from the cave ceiling. The panther, it hadn't left. It was just waiting, observing the new threat, calculating. The predator's acrid scent, which had diminished for a moment, now intensified, mixing with the smell of gunpowder and human sweat. The bandits heard it too. The leader looked up, his face contorted into a frown. What was that? A jaguar? The growl repeated, stronger, and a small pebble fell from above, hitting one of the younger bandit's shoulders. He let out a cry of surprise and pain. "Damn! There's a beast up there!" The cunning panther was using the bandit's presence to its advantage. It wouldn't directly attack the men, but its growl and the falling stones served to distract, to intimidate, to maintain pressure on the cave. It wanted the prey for itself, and the men were just a temporary nuisance. The bull, sensing the new dynamic, maintained its position at the entrance, but its eyes now alternated between the bandits and the ceiling. It was surrounded on all sides, a solitary guardian against the entire forest. The grandmother, her heart pounding erratically, saw the opportunity. The bandits were divided, their attention fragmented between the bull and the panther. It was a fragile truce, but a truce nonetheless. She looked at the bull, her eyes meeting its. There was a silent understanding between them, an alliance forged in desperation. "This damn beast is going to bring everything down," the bandits' leader shouted, irritated. "Let's just go in and see what's there. To hell with the jaguar. It won't want to fight with us." He gestured to the other two, who hesitantly began to move to flank the bull. One of them tried to sneak past on the right, machete in hand. But the bull was fast, despite its injured leg. With a surprising movement, it spun its body, blocking the bandit's path with its massive flank. The man stumbled backward, almost falling. "Son of a bitch," he cursed. The leader, furious, raised his rifle. "Enough playing around. Let's take this beast down." The grandmother closed her eyes, expecting the shot, but it didn't come. Instead, a sharp cry from one of the bandits. "Boss! Behind you!" The leader turned sharply. The panther, taking advantage of the distraction, had descended from a side rock, not to attack, but to position itself. Its green eyes glowing in the dawn's gloom. It wasn't interested in the men as prey, but as an obstacle. It growled, a sound that seemed to tear the air, and took a step forward, showing its fangs. The bandits, caught by surprise, recoiled. They were hunters, yes, but a black panther in its own territory was a force to be respected, feared. The beast seemed to have no fear of them, only a cold determination. The grandmother opened her eyes. The scene was surreal, the bull blocking the cave entrance, the bandits retreating before the panther, which now stood between them and the crevice. The forest had become a battle stage, and they were at its center. The bandits' leader, rifle still pointed, hesitated. Shooting the panther would mean a direct confrontation with a furious beast, and he didn't know what else might be lurking. The dawn light, now stronger, revealed the density of the thicket, the hiding places, the shadows. The panther, with a fluid and elegant movement, took another step, its eyes fixed on the men. It wasn't attacking, but its presence was an undeniable threat. It was a war of nerves, and the beast was winning. The bull, in turn, took advantage of the distraction. With a snort of relief and renewed fury, it prepared itself. It didn't know what would come next, but it knew it wouldn't give up. The grandmother, observing the deadly dance between predators and men, felt a new wave of hope, fragile as the dawn light, but hope nonetheless. Perhaps, just perhaps, the forest didn't want to devour them completely. Perhaps amidst so much danger, there was a chance. But the smell of blood from the bull's leg, and the panther's growl, and the bandits' voices all reminded her that the battle was far from over. They were alive for now, but dawn brought with it the promise of a final confrontation. Dawn unfolded, not as a new beginning, but as a lit stage for a bloody climax. The grandmother, huddled in the cave's damp darkness, felt her heart pound against her ribs. Each beat a war drum echoing in her ears. Hope, that faint flame that had ignited for a brief instant, now flickered, threatened by the icy winds of fear. Outside, the Black Panther, an elegant and lethal shadow, kept the bandits at bay, its green eyes fixed on them. A silent promise of retribution. The leader, the corpulent man with the rifle, was visibly irritated, his patience draining as fast as the morning mist. "What the hell is this? Are you just going to stare at us, you shitty cat?" The leader's voice cut through the air, laden with frustration and thinly veiled fear. He raised his rifle, the barrel pointing at the beast. His two younger, visibly terrified companions took a step back, their eyes split between the panther and the cave entrance, where the bull, a wall of muscle and fury, watched them. The panther did not retreat. Instead, it let out a deeper growl, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of the earth, and took another step forward, its claws semi-retracted, ready to strike. It was a challenge, a declaration of dominance. It would not be intimidated. It wanted its prey, and no one, not even armed men, would stop it. The leader, his face red with rage, pulled the trigger. The rifle's deafening report echoed through the forest, a brutal, ear-splitting sound that made the grandmother cry out, a silent sound, muffled by the hand she brought to her mouth. The shot, however, did not hit the panther. The beast, with surprising agility, had dodged at the last second, disappearing in a black blur between the trees. The shot hit a rock behind where it had been, shattering it and sending fragments in all directions. "Damn! It's fast!" the leader cursed, reloading his rifle with trembling hands. The other two bandits were in a panic. "Boss, this jaguar is from hell. We'd better leave," one of them pleaded, his face pale. But the leader was stubborn, or perhaps greed blinded him. "We're not going anywhere. There's something valuable in there, I can feel it. And this damn beast won't stop me." He looked at the cave entrance, where the bull remained motionless, its red eyes fixed on him. "You two, try to flank the bull. I'll handle the jaguar if it shows up again." The bandits hesitated, but the leader's authority, and perhaps the fear of what he would do if they disobeyed, spurred them on. One of them, carrying the machete, tried to sneak around to the right, while the other, more cautious, tried to the left. The bull, however, was more than a simple animal. It was a guardian, and its intelligence, forged in pain and loyalty, was underestimated. With a movement that defied its injured leg, it spun its massive body, blocking the path of the bandit on the right with brutal force. The man was thrown backward, falling heavily to the ground, his machete flying from his hand. He groaned in pain, his head hitting a rock. At the same instant, the bandit on the left, seeing an opportunity, tried to slip into the crevice. But the bull, even with one eye on the panther's threat, was alert. It snorted a warning sound and lowered its horns, pointing them directly at the man. The bandit stopped abruptly, terror etched on his face. He was inches from being gored. It was then that the panther reappeared, not from where it had hidden, but from a completely different angle. Emerging from the top of a tree, dropping with the lightness of a feather behind the bandit's leader, it did not attack, not yet. It merely landed, its eyes glowing in the gloom, a low growl vibrating in its chest. It was a calculated move, a checkmate. The leader was trapped between the beast and the cave entrance. The leader turned, rifle still in hand, but his face was now white. He was surrounded. The fallen bandit groaned. The other was paralyzed by the bull. The grandmother, observing everything from the back of the cave, felt a shiver run down her spine. The forest indeed had risen, but perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't on the side of men. The panther took a step, then another, slowly, its muscles tense, ready to pounce. The leader raised his rifle again, but the hesitation was palpable. Shooting the panther now would mean turning his back on the bull, and he knew the animal would not hesitate. He was trapped. The bull, sensing the advantage, snorted again, a sound of triumph and challenge. It didn't need to fight. The forest was fighting for it. The grandmother, with tear-filled eyes, watched the deadly dance unfold. The panther, the bull, the bandits. It was a deadly dance, and time, which had seemed to run out, now stretched into agonizing suspense. The battle was far from over, but the scales, for a brief moment, seemed to tip towards survival. The final confrontation had begun, and the fate of all lay in the claws of wild nature. The morning air, once icy and silent, now vibrated with the tension of a bow about to be released. The bandit leader, trapped between the beast and the bull, felt cold sweat trickle down his spine, mixing with the dust and the smell of damp earth. His eyes, once full of arrogance, now reflected growing panic. He was a hunter, a predator, but here, on this wild stage, he was the prey. The Black Panther, a perfect silhouette of power and grace, held him under its piercing gaze, a low, almost inaudible growl vibrating in its chest. It was the melody of death, and he heard it clearly. The bull, at the cave entrance, remained a mountain of contained fury. Its horns, sharp and menacing, were lowered, pointing at the paralyzed bandit, who still trembled, unable to move. The other, who had fallen, groaned faintly, his head throbbing against the rock. The grandmother, deep inside the cave, watched everything with bated breath, each beat of her heart echoing like thunder in the darkness. She saw the scales of life and death swing, and felt the weight of every movement, every decision. "I'm not going to die here, damn it!" the leader shouted, his voice hoarse, more to himself than to the animals. He raised his rifle again, the barrel trembling slightly. His eyes swept the scene, looking for an opening, an escape. The panther was too close for a precise shot without risk. The bull, an impenetrable fortress. Greed, which had led him there, now mingled with pure survival instinct, distorting his judgment. He needed to eliminate one of the threats, and the bull, wounded, seemed the easier target, which would give him a chance to turn and face the panther. With a desperate decision, he spun his body, pointing the rifle at the bull. "Die, you piece of shit animal!" The report was deafening, tearing the forest silence into 1,000 pieces. The grandmother let out a silent scream, covering her ears. The shot, however, was rushed, deflected by panic. The bullet ricocheted off the rock above the bull's head, sending splinters into the air, but not hitting the animal. The error was fatal. The bull, already wounded and furious, exploded in primal rage. With a snort that seemed to come from the depths of the earth, it charged, not at the paralyzed bandit, but at the leader who had dared to attack it. The movement was surprising, too fast for an animal of that size. The leader, still recovering from the rifle's recoil, barely had time to react. The bull hit him with its head, not with its horns, but with the brute force of its skull, throwing him sideways with a dry impact. The rifle flew from his hands, falling a few meters away, useless. At the same instant, the Black Panther, observing the scene with cold intelligence, seized the opportunity. As the leader stumbled, disoriented by the bull's blow, the beast moved, not a direct attack to kill, but a calculated move to incapacitate. With a silent and precise leap, it landed on the leader's back, its claws not digging into the flesh to tear, but to immobilize, to force the man to the ground. A guttural growl vibrated in its chest, right next to the bandit's ear, a promise of excruciating pain, if he dared to resist. The leader fell heavily, the panther on him, immobilizing him with surprising force. His cries of pain and terror were muffled by the beast's growl and the bull's snort, which now stood over the fallen rifle, preventing any attempt to retrieve it. The paralyzed bandit, witnessing the scene, finally found the strength to move, but only to crawl backward, away from the cave entrance, away from the bull, away from the panther. The other, the injured one, tried to get up, but the pain brought him down again. The grandmother, inside the cave, watched the scene unfold like a vivid nightmare. The leader, once so menacing, was now subdued, at the mercy of the beast. The bull, her guardian, had become a silent executioner, controlling the battlefield. The forest had answered the call of violence, and its retribution was relentless. The panther, with a final warning growl, descended from the leader's back, but did not move away. It stood a few steps from him, its green eyes fixed on the man, who now lay on the ground trembling, his face pale with terror. It had disarmed the man, not with unnecessary violence, but with a display of power that broke his will. The bull, in turn, turned its attention to the other two bandits. The one crawling backward stopped abruptly when the bull's red eyes fixed on him. He was trapped between the bull's fury and the panther's terror. The injured one, seeing the hopeless situation, merely groaned and closed his eyes, accepting his fate. Dawn, which had once promised a bloody outcome, now brought a scene of wild domination. The grandmother, with a lump in her throat, realized that nature had not chosen a side, but had imposed its own law. Men, with their weapons and their greed, were mere intruders in a realm that did not belong to them. The panther took a step toward the leader, who was on the ground. Its teeth, white and sharp, gleamed in the faint light. It was not interested in negotiating. It wanted the prey that was in the cave, and the bandits were just a nuisance that needed to be removed. The bull, in turn, snorted, a warning sound to the other two. The alliance, once fragile, now seemed stronger, forged in necessity and instinctive intelligence. The grandmother felt a wave of relief, followed by an even deeper fear. The bandits were neutralized, yes, but the panther was still there, and its ultimate goal had not changed. She looked at the bull, which now seemed exhausted, its injured leg throbbing, but its eyes still vigilant. It had done its part, but what would come next? The forest had calmed, but it was the calm before the final storm. The panther, with a fluid movement, turned its head, and its green eyes met the grandmother's, even through the cave's gloom. It was a look of recognition, of hunger, of an inevitable promise. The game was not over. Only the first round. The panther's gaze, green and deep, pierced the cave's gloom, meeting the grandmother's tear-filled eyes. There was no anger, only an ancestral hunger, a cold determination that chilled the old woman's blood in her veins. It was the recognition of prey, the end of a long hunt. The grandmother felt a shiver run down her spine, a premonition that the time the bull had bought with such bravery was now running out. The bandits were mere obstacles, removed with nature's brutal efficiency. Now the path was clear. The black beast took a step, then another, its muscles rippling beneath its silk-like gleaming hide. There was no hurry, only an unshakable certainty. It moved with the lethal grace of a phantom, each paw touching the ground with a lightness that belied its power. The bandit leader, still on the ground, trembled, his eyes fixed on the panther as it moved away from him, ignoring him completely. He was merely an inconvenience, and now a lesson. The bull, noticing the panther's shift in focus, snorted again, a hoarse, exhausted sound. Its injured leg throbbed with searing pain, and the effort of the previous battle had taken its toll. But its eyes, once red with fury, now shone with fierce determination, a last vestige of strength it held for this final moment. The panther stopped a few meters from the cave entrance, its eyes fixed on the grandmother, but its body slightly angled, ready to react to the bull. It was a deadly ballet of predator and protector. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth, blood, and fear. The grandmother, deep inside the cave, felt her heart pound in her chest. She could see the panther's sharp teeth, the tension in its shoulders, the promise of an imminent attack. She looked at the bull, her wounded guardian, and a wave of gratitude and despair washed over her. It had done so much, sacrificed so much. But nature was relentless, and the panther was the embodiment of that truth. The bull, with visible effort, dragged its injured leg a little further forward, positioning itself between the panther and the cave entrance. It was a wall of flesh and bone, a final barrier. Its horns, once used to ward off men, were now the last line of defense against the predator. The panther growled, a low, vibrant sound that made the cave stones tremble. It was a warning, a challenge. It didn't want to fight the bull. It wanted its prey, and the animal was an impediment. The grandmother, her voice choked, whispered, "No, my son, no more." She knew the bull was at its limit. Every movement was agony. But the animal, as if understanding her words, merely snorted, its eyes fixed on the panther, refusing to yield. It was a guardian, and its loyalty was unbreakable. The panther, impatient, took a sideways step, trying to flank the bull. It was fast, agile, and knew that the bull's brute strength was limited by its speed. But the bull, even wounded, was clever. It rotated its body, always keeping the panther in front of it, its horns pointed like spears. The dance continued for a few agonizing seconds, each movement a test of will and endurance. The panther tried to find an opening, the bull refused to give it. Suddenly the panther crouched, its muscles tense, ready to pounce. It wasn't a direct attack on the bull, but an attempt to get past it, to slip into the cave. It knew the bull wouldn't be able to react in time if it was fast enough. The grandmother held her breath, her heart pounding erratically. She saw the beast prepare to leap, its eyes fixed on her, a promise of darkness. But the bull, with a final burst of strength, did something unexpected. It didn't wait for the pounce. It charged, not an attacking charge, but a charge of sacrifice. With a roar that seemed to tear its own throat, it threw itself forward, not to gore the panther, but to completely block the cave entrance with its massive body. It knew it couldn't beat it in speed, but it could prevent it from entering. The panther, caught by surprise by the bull's desperate move, was forced to recoil a step. Its pounce aborted, it growled furiously, frustrated. The bull was there, a living wall, trembling with exhaustion and pain, but unyielding. Its injured leg now barely supported it, but it held firm, head lowered, horns pointed at the beast. The grandmother, witnessing the bull's final act of loyalty, felt tears stream freely down her face. It was sacrificing itself for her, giving its life so she could have a chance. The panther in turn circled, its eyes gleaming with contained fury. It knew it couldn't get past the bull without a bloody fight, a fight that would leave it vulnerable, and it was not one to waste energy. The sun began to climb higher in the sky, painting the forest with golden hues. The scene was surreal. The exhausted bull, the frustrated panther, the incapacitated bandits. The grandmother, deep inside the cave, felt the weight of every moment, the scales of life and death still swaying. The panther, with a final warning growl, retreated a few steps, its eyes still fixed on the bull, then on the cave. It had not given up, it was merely re-evaluating. The bull had won this round, but the hunt was not yet over. The forest, with its secrets and its relentless laws, awaited the next move. The forest, with its secrets and its relentless laws, awaited the next move. The panther, with the cold intelligence of an ancient predator, did not rush. Its green eyes, now more vivid in the growing light of dawn, swept over the bull, analyzing every tremor, every gasping breath, every drop of blood that trickled from its injured leg. It was not foolish enough to waste precious energy on a frontal attack against such a determined adversary, even if wounded. Patience was a weapon as lethal as its claws. The bull, a mountain of flesh and loyalty, visibly trembled. Its breathing was a hoarse, irregular sound, a death rattle that seemed to fight against life itself. The front leg, where the wound throbbed, barely supported it, and it leaned more weight on the other three, slightly losing balance. Drops of sweat and blood mingled in its fur, and exhaustion weighed upon it like a rock. But its eyes, still fixed on the panther, refused to yield. It was a guardian, and its promise, silent and instinctive, was stronger than pain. Inside the cave, the grandmother watched the scene with a heavy heart. Every second was an eternity of agony. She saw life draining from the bull, her savior, and felt an overwhelming guilt. It was sacrificing itself for her, an old woman abandoned by her own blood. The image of her grandson, with his false smile and his greed, invaded her mind, a cruel contrast to the animal's unconditional loyalty. "My grandson left me to be devoured," she thought, tears streaming. "But this animal protects me with its own life." It was a bitter irony, a testament to human cruelty and wild nobility. The panther began to circle. Not in a hurry, but with calculated slowness, its movements fluid and silent as a shadow. It wasn't just walking, it was studying, looking for an opening, an angle that the bull, in its exhaustion, couldn't cover. Its eyes never left the bull, but its mind was mapping the cave, the position of the fallen bandits, the uneven terrain. The bull, with a Herculean effort, tried to turn its massive body, always keeping the panther in front, its horns pointed like a final threat. But each turn was agony, each movement drained more of its last reserves. It stumbled, almost falling, but recovered. the strength of its will overcoming the weakness of its body. The bandits, paralyzed witnesses to that deadly ballet, remained motionless. The leader, still in shock from the panther's attack, lay on the ground, eyes wide with terror, unable to look away from the beast that now toyed with its next victim. The one crawling backward had frozen, fear gripping him to the ground. The injured one groaned softly, oblivious to the battle unfolding. They were mere spectators, their own misery eclipsed by nature's brutal grandeur. The sun climbed higher, bathing the forest in vibrant gold, but the light seemed only to intensify the darkness of the situation. The panther, now more visible in its black splendor, paused for an instant. Its muscles tense. It had found what it was looking for. The bull, in one of its slow turns, had exposed a fraction of a second, a minuscule flaw in its defense, a point where the cave rock curved in such a way that, with enough speed, the panther could slip behind it or perhaps, with a precise leap, pass over its weaker flank. The beast growled again, a sharper sound this time. Laden with anticipation, it crouched, its eyes no longer fixed on the bull, but on the grandmother who was huddled in the back of the cave. It was a look of triumph, of certainty. The bull's time had come to an end. With a roar that seemed to tear from the depths of its soul, the bull made its last move. There was no more strength to turn, to block. It knew. It felt death approaching, but its loyalty was unbreakable. With one last, desperate effort, it tried to lunge forward, not to attack, but to fall in such a way that its body, even lifeless, would still block the cave entrance. A final sacrifice, a wall of flesh and bone against the predator. But the panther was faster. It did not wait for it to fall. The instant the bull began to move, it launched itself. Not a direct pounce, but a lateral movement, an explosion of speed that carried it to the bull's right, aiming for the small gap it had left, the blind spot its exhaustion and injury had created. It was a race against death, a final duel between loyalty and hunger. The grandmother screamed, a hoarse, desperate sound, as she watched the panther transform into a black blur, passing the bull, which now slowly collapsed, its mission almost complete, but not in time. The beast was inside. The beast was inside. The cave's darkness, once a refuge, transformed into a stage for terror. The air grew dense, heavy with the predator's acrid scent, the muffled sound of the grandmother's heartbeats echoing in her own ears. She saw the panther's green eyes, now incandescent in the gloom, fixed on her. It was the end. Her grandson's promise, the prophecy of her death, seemed about to come true. Outside, the bull collapsed. Its massive body, a wall of loyalty and sacrifice, fell with a dull thud, raising a cloud of dust and earth. But even in its last breath, it fulfilled its promise. Its body, heavy and inert, rolled slightly, fitting almost perfectly into the cave entrance, blocking it even more effectively. There were no more gaps, no more space for the panther to slip out without considerable effort. The bull, in its death, sealed the entrance, turning the cave into a trap for the predator itself. The panther, which had passed the bull the instant it fell, stopped. Its movements, once fluid and calculated, were now those of a cornered beast. It turned, growling, realizing the entrance was blocked. The grandmother, huddled, watched the scene, terror paralyzing her. The panther was there, a few meters away, but its attention was no longer on her. The instinct for survival, stronger than hunger, had taken over. The beast was trapped. Its green eyes swept the cave, looking for an exit. There was none. The dawn light, which had once promised hope, now barely penetrated, creating dancing shadows that distorted reality. The panther growled again, a sound of frustration and rage. It was used to being the hunter, not the hunted. Then, its eyes fixed on the bandits. The leader, still sprawled, eyes wide, groaned softly. The one crawling backward had frozen in a pose of terror, his insides churning with fear. The injured one, oblivious to everything, continued to whimper. They were easy prey, vulnerable, and most importantly, they were closer to the panther and did not pose an immediate threat like the bull. Nature, in its brutality and relentless logic, made its choice. The panther was not foolish. It would not waste energy trying to move the dead bull, nor would it risk a prolonged confrontation with the grandmother, who, though frail, was in a tight corner. The bandits, on the other hand, were an unexpected feast, a reward for its patience. With a deafening roar that echoed off the cave walls, the panther lunged, not towards the grandmother, but towards the nearest bandit, the one crawling backward. The man let out a sharp scream, a sound of pure terror, before the beast's claws and teeth silenced him forever. It was quick, brutal, a demonstration of wild force. Blood spurted, staining the rocks and earth. The grandmother closed her eyes, her hands covering her face. But the sounds were impossible to ignore. The panther's growls, the men's screams, the cracking of bones. It was wild justice, the law of the jungle asserting itself over human cruelty. Her grandson had abandoned her to be devoured, but the panther, in its hunger, had found easier prey, victims of their own malice. When the grandmother finally dared to open her eyes, the scene was one of indescribable horror. The three bandits lay motionless, their lives cut short by the panther's fury. The beast, now sated, was licking its paws, its eyes still gleaming in the gloom, but without the murderous urgency of before. It looked at the grandmother one last time, a gaze that seemed to carry the ancestral wisdom of the forest, before slinking into a darker corner of the cave, where it lay down, satisfied and vigilant. The grandmother was alive, saved, not by her grandson, but by the sacrifice of a bull and the indifferent brutality of nature. Tears streamed down her wrinkled face, not just from terror, but from a deep and painful gratitude. She had witnessed the cruelty of men and the unwavering loyalty of an animal. The bull outside was her true guardian, her savior. The sun was already high, and the light, filtering through the gaps in the dead bull's body, painted the cave with shades of red and gold. The forest outside continued its cycle of life and death, oblivious to the tragedy and miracle that had happened there. The grandmother, alone among the dead and the sleeping predator, felt a deep weariness, but also a new strength. She had survived, and now, she knew, her life would have a new purpose. She had been abandoned, but the forest, in its savagery, had given her a second chance. The smell of blood and earth still hung in the air, but now, mingled with it,